Hey guys, I'm George. I'm the founder and admin of the SIBO Specific Food Guide Facebook group. And I wanted to try something a little bit different. I wanted to test out a live video to see if I could have a little bit more of a human discussion connection with you guys. My buddy Josh and I were actually thinking about exactly this, and we wanted to kind of share our stories and our experiences. Let me see if I can get him in here. There we go. All right. But yeah, basically, we do something a little bit different because we've all had an opportunity to connect via different posts and whatnot, and we wanted to try kind of a different way of connection. So, how's it going, Josh?
What's up, George? This is awesome. I'm super excited to be able to join you here and to kind of open this group up to discussion and kind of humanize it. I think it's really cool that we're trying to do this. Let's see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say you're absolutely right. I think this could be the start of something totally new for the SIBO community because we're kind of anonymous when we're behind our computers and we're commenting and we're reading, and it's kind of easy to forget that we're actually a community of individuals, and we're not just alone by ourselves, kind of stumbling around. Like, we really are a group, and I think that this might be an avenue for us to take our solidarity to the next level and to potentially, learn more from each other to be more successful patients.
Definitely. I totally agree with that just because one of the things I've noticed going through living with SIBO, IBS, is that the condition is you become so isolated with the condition, and not many people can understand what it actually feels like to have the symptoms you do because it's in your gut. And, it's not like having a broken arm, right? Someone can't tell that your arm's broken and you're hurting. And it affects every part of your life from the social aspects to, psychological issues to, everything. So I think um, getting people to work together, seeing real people talking about their issues and not just like typing in on the Facebook chat. I think it could be a really helpful tool for people to look at, to give them hope, encouragement, to also allow us to ask questions to other people live, to see what they've been through, what's worked for them. Basically doing all that. I think it's a cool way to take it to the next level. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And
where I'm coming from and all those things. So basically, I joined this group recently. I've been dealing with SIBO IBS for probably 4 years now, um, and I just wanted to join because it's helpful always getting responses from other people when you're working with a doctor, when you're testing different supplements or treatment options. Getting feedback from someone else who's maybe already been through that, just saying like, hey, maybe try this, or this is what I had to do, is really helpful. So that's kind of why I joined this group, and that's why I'm excited to be here. So, yeah.
great. I think that's great. So Josh and we kind of wanted to keep this really casual, just a kind of conversation. Just wanted to talk a little bit just about our experiences. We really hope that it could be a discussion. So if there's any of you who jump in and have any questions or any comments, please do so. We would really like to have this be a two-way street. Until then, we've actually, we're happy to talk a little bit about our experiences, and kind of go back and forth with that. But we would really, really love to hear your thoughts and your comments. So please jump in at any time. So, Josh, why don't you just kind of walk me through a little bit of your journey? Give me just broad strokes of how SIBO entered your life and the impact that it's had and where it's taken you.
Yeah, definitely. I think my story, a lot of people will be able to relate to it. I kind of when I was younger, before coming down with like the SIBO infection specifically, I had somewhat of a sensitive stomach, but it never really was an issue that was super severe to the point where it changed my life. So I grew up a little bit of a sensitive stomach, kind of stayed away from dairy and stuff like that. It's how I grew up. But then it wasn't until my sophomore year in college, I was a baseball player, that first semester, that sophomore year, I just started having these nasty digestive symptoms, which included excessive gas, bloating. I'm kind of a mixed case, constipation slash diarrhea. It would kind of alternate. And then also at that time, when it got severe, really the fatigue started to come in, and also even the mental symptoms. I really noticed how my brain changes when my gut is flaring up. So that's kind of when all that stuff came into play. And at that time, I really wasn't familiar with any of the research out there. So I was desperate. I was looking for solutions. I didn't know what to do. And it was very tough because I was a very motivated kid. I was playing baseball at a junior college. My first year, I was an all conference player. So I was really excited for the future. And then I came down with this illness that kind of, it really had an impact on my life because it kind of made me stop and think about, I'm dealing with this issue. My health is rotten. Um, and that baseball
So let me
season, I
let me stop you
struggled.
right there.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah,
stop you right there because I think that that experience is something that is very relatable. That a lot of people are kind of in the thick of whatever stage of their lives, and suddenly things start to change with their body, and they don't necessarily understand them, but it's progressive, right? It's incremental.
yeah.
So it's not something that produces maybe particularly large red flags unless it's maybe some really challenging diarrhea or something like that. But I think for a lot of people, it's very incremental and it kind of slowly encroaches on your life. So I want you to go into a little bit more of, when did you start, when did you say to yourself, all these symptoms have been going on. I think there's something wrong with me. I need to do some research or I need to get some help.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. I think it was really, so like I said, it was my sophomore year in college. I kind of started having those severe issues, and I was never the kind of person to just like miss practice, to kind of slack off, do that, do those types of things. So, I got to the point where it's so severe and I was struggling, and I was in really like a dark state with my mental and physical shape. So I just decided I needed a break from baseball. That's when it really started, and that's when I started searching for doctors. I went to specialist gastroenterologist then, and that's when I really started to test and really started to kind of look for alternative options and see what was out there that could help me get rid of these symptoms because they were so severe at that time. So um, I kind of had to put my life on hold at that point. And that was hard because I had a chance to get, Division I scholarships to play baseball. So just saying, I'm not going to practice, I'm not going to do this, I'm taking months off before the season. That was a big deal for me, and that was really kind of like a life crisis or a turning point for me, where I realized that something was wrong with my body, and that was my main focus, and that was the only thing that mattered. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, can get to a point like that in their life, and they realize that, something's not right, and, they search for things to get better. They look for ways they can improve their health. So I would say that was the turning point. And like I said before, I took a little break and then I continued to play that season, but it ended up not being a good season because my health still, I was still struggling. My energy was low. I was still having pretty nasty symptoms. So that's really when it started, though. When I remember.
Okay, I think you brought up a really good point where you really feel like, for a lot of us, we feel like our life our health reaches a point where our life has to be put on hold. I think those were your words, and I think that's just, really puts a finger on what the experience is like. And I would actually really like you to expand on that a little bit more. Like, how did that affect your, obviously your baseball season was impacted substantially, and that was something that was really important to you. But what about other areas of your life? Like, what exactly do you mean by putting your life on hold? Because I think
Yeah,
that that's something
definitely.
that a lot of people go through with this illness. I mean, it's almost like we have to reach a point where our symptoms are so challenging where we really have to press, the pause button and focus on our health. But I'm curious as to how that manifested for you, because I think it looks different for everybody, but it's good to share how that really plays out when you're putting your life on hold for your health.
Yeah, definitely. Great question as well. I think that's a really important point to living with this condition once you realize that you have some health issue. For me, it really that's one of the things I think is so challenging about living with IBS SIBO is that it really it really impacts your whole life because it impacts your social life. For example, I stopped going out on nights and doing like, drinking at all. I cut out all alcohol. I basically had to watch what I put into my body because I knew that, if I was eating a bunch of super sugary, um, not foods that were not good for this condition, then my gut would flare up. So it really sort of isolated me at that time. Kind of got away from hanging out with my friends. I lost some relationships with friends. Stopped kind of going out drinking, which is a good thing and a bad thing because it is fun to go out sometimes and enjoy your friends, right? I think everyone loves that. And then I'd say other aspects, the other tough thing is when you don't really know what the cause of what you're dealing with is. For me at that time, I didn't really know what this issue was. That's a really hard thing to deal with too because for example, when I'm talking to my baseball coach and telling him, "Hey, I'm going to take some time off. I'm just not feeling right. My body is just messed up right now." Um, Not being able to tell him exactly what it was, that's a really hard issue to deal with too. Like, how do you approach people? How do you tell them what you're dealing with, right? That's
So
still
how
to
did
this.
you tell people how did you explain what was going on?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, it's very tough to say exactly what's going on. Basically, I just said, I'm having some severe stomach issues. I'm having like, diarrhea and gas and, I just feel my body doesn't feel right. I'm fatigued. I'm just not, I just need some time off. That's kind of how I approached it because when you're given the label, like at that early stage when I came down with this, when you're given the label of IBS and you don't really know much else besides that, it's basically like saying, this person has digestive problems. They've been going on for a while. They're relatively severe, but we don't really know what it is. So um, basically, it's really hard to describe what you're going through to other people. And it's not like other conditions where you can tell them, hey, I have ulcerative colitis, like I have an inflammatory bowel disease. This is what I have, right? And that's in a sense to me is what's so difficult about living with this condition is it's really hard to kind of explain to people what you have and they look at you with this stigma of like this person might just have like he might just be like soft or he might be just kind of having some food sensitivities or he might be just sensitive so it's really hard to describe it which is a challenge for a lot of people I think.
Absolutely. And I think that for a lot of us, we go through this process of, we have our life as we do it, and then we have our life with SIBO in it, and then we have our post SIBO life, I would like to call it, because for most of us, it's going to be a chronic illness, right? So
Yeah,
I think that it's important to share what it's like to have your SIBO story enter into your life story and how they become one. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot
yeah,
of people who have had SIBO, who have SIBO, would actually point to some of the really positive impacts that it has had on our life. Not to say that it's not really challenging, but it's part of that challenge that it actually, in the long run, could be really, really positive for our health. And I think that's one of the reasons why we connected, is that we have a similar story. So I also experienced symptoms in college, my freshman year in college. And it was the same thing. I was really motivated. I was really driven. I was trying to, do well at school, make new friends, go on adventures, what have you. And suddenly I had to be aware of my own body and health in a way that I had never been before. And I also had to pinpoint what was going on and figure out how to communicate that to other people when I was not able to be present for certain activities or events or, obligations, right?
Yeah.
And that was super difficult. And I think that experience is something that both of us feel is really important to share, because it's different for everybody, but it really helps you feel like you're not the only person who has to go through that transition, because it's really big deal. So I do want to talk more about sort of the psychosocial impacts of this illness, but I think that we should kind of come back to that, table that for now, and get a little bit further into your story, and especially how you first encountered the word SIBO and what your journey was once you discovered what it was. I think you started to get into that a little bit, but what was your reaction when you first learned about it, and what did your treatment chapter look like?
Yeah, definitely a good question. I first started to learn about the term SIBO and the research that, mainly the team at Cedars-Sinai at that point were doing, actually because of my dad. My dad's a dentist, so he's kind of looped into the scientific research that's going on in the medical field. So, and he knew I was struggling with digestive issues, and we both, wanted to find a solution for me so that I could feel better. So, I think he came across it in a scientific journal, and it showed the research that the team up in LA was doing for IBS, and they showed a link to SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, as everyone knows. And it just showed how, I think the study then was using rifaximin, and it showed how using a course of targeted antibiotics was able to, reduce symptoms dramatically and prolong that reduction in symptoms. So that's when I first learned about it from him. And then with that information and knowledge and of the research going on at that time, I brought that to my gastroenterologist and started to have a discussion with him. So that's when I first found out about it, about that term specifically, that link to IBS. And also, so that's what kickstarted when I had that discussion with the gastroenterologist that I was working with at that time. That's what kickstarted the discussion of, should we try this? Can we try this? I'm willing to try this because I'm suffering, right? I'm having these symptoms. They don't go away. Like, what can I do to help this? So that's when it really started. And that's when my journey into slowly a progression of learning more about the research and about what SIBO is and about how to treat it, how to prevent relapse, because that's really important too. And also the fact that a lot of people have to deal with this for a while because it relapses, and it's very hard to treat because the solutions aren't perfect. So that was really my introduction to SIBO.
So Josh, what were some of the treatments that you tried, and what was your how did they impact your body?
Yeah, the first treatment I tried for this was rifaximin. Like a lot of people, their first treatment, and it was amazing. It drastically changed my life, and that's when I knew that this connection was real. At least I had found something that was, something that helped, something that could kind of pinpoint an actual scientific cause of the condition I was dealing with. That was even a huge step for me. Even if I did relapse after that, that was like just having that knowledge and knowing that there was research saying that IBS actually was a scientific condition with known causes or links, that was huge for me. So that first time I took rifaximin, it was amazing. My symptoms basically disappeared overnight, and I remember that very vividly because I started taking the rifaximin before I went to bed, my first dose, and then the next day I woke up and it was like my brain was clear, my bowel movement in the morning was perfect. Gas, bloating was all it had all disappeared, and I that was just amazing to me. So um,
So that was the
yeah,
moment when you felt like, okay, this is a real illness. I've got evidence that if I take a treatment for this, I feel better, right? And
yeah,
so, and actually, the exact same thing happened to me, right? So I think you're completely on the money when you say that most people start with rifaximin, and for a lot of people, you get really good results in a fairly short period of time. And it's profound because that's especially the moment when you feel like, okay, this is what's going on with me. And that's a very liberating feeling at
yeah,
first to really pinpoint what's, being a primary factor in your symptoms. But also for a lot of people, after they do an initial round of rifaximin, there's the relapse, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
did you, what, and describe also how that impacted you emotionally, right? Where you're at this high of taking rifaximin, and then what happened after your round of rifaximin, and how did that impact you emotionally?
Yeah, so I had that dramatic improvement in symptoms. At that time, I didn't know as much about ways that you can prolong um, the successful treatment. I didn't know as much about I didn't know anything about prokinetics, about diet, about even like living a healthy lifestyle to help you with this condition. So I didn't really know much about that. I just was at the point where I took the antibiotics. I was feeling great. Um, and it really lasted for a long time. That those first rounds, I would say 4 or 5 months, and I would say even doing antibiotics for that first time, the specific SIBO antibiotics, it has helped me to this day because at that time I was experiencing like severe diarrhea a lot. I've kind of changed over the course of my illness. And but I don't to this day I think they've helped in the sense that I don't have severe diarrhea like that anymore. But I do still relapse and I have to retreat occasionally. But really, like you said, the emotional aspect of dealing with a high of a treatment being successful and then having that last for a while, but then eventually relapsing again and how discouraging that can be, right? Because you feel so great, you do your first treatment and then you relapse, and that can be challenging as well if you don't realize the other factors that come into play with this condition. That sometimes it's worth trying prokinetics. It helps to get on a SIBO specific diet or a lower carbohydrate diet to prolong that successful treatment. I didn't know those things, so I got right back to um, eating a ton of carbs, sugars, stuff like that. So it did last for a while that first time, but I didn't really understand the other issues that went along with it and how I could really, build a solid foundation for health with this condition at the time.
Right, absolutely. And let me just offer a brief caveat that, of course, this discussion is about medical treatments and options, but of course, this is solely our experience, and so we hope that you won't make any decisions about your health based on our discussion without obviously speaking with your own medical team. So, but I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that emotional experience, because that's talked about probably the least when you look at blogs and websites and other resources that really go into sort of the biology, the treatment protocols, the diet protocols. But there's really a large component that is us and how we experience this very, very individual disease. And it sounds like your experience is pretty, pretty standard in that respect, and that there are some pretty big ups and downs as we go through it. And I think what's also really interesting is that you talked about how you didn't know about other elements of this treatment, right? So you did the rifaximin, you felt better, but you didn't have the information yet about diets and prokinetics and other information that supports, like you said, a longer period of reduced symptoms and eventually remission, right? So I think that's really important point, because that's something that we as a community really need to work together to increase awareness of this illness, and not just awareness of the illness, but the different pieces that have to come together in order to be as successful as we possibly can be, right? And the emotional component is really big piece of that. So I had kind of a fun question in mind. What would you tell yourself at the time of when you first started taking rifaximin, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think the one thing that really I think is important for people who are dealing with this is to know that, you know, even though, let's say you do a treatment of rifaximin and then you relapse later down on the road, just to know that you live with this, basically, I like to call it a disease, because it's something that, we don't have perfect solutions for yet. And people, you can be better off for it if you take the right mindset and realize that, it is something that you might have to manage for a while. Because I think the hardest thing when you don't know much about the research, when you don't know much about the long-term outlooks of the condition, is that you think right when you take a dose of antibiotics and you feel amazing, that your life is going to be like that from that point on. And for a lot of people, unfortunately, they have to deal with, staying on a diet consistently or retreating symptoms. So I guess I would say to myself, just kind of take a deep breath, do the best you can, work with medical professionals while also looking for solutions and experimenting on your own. Taking your health kind of into your own hands and kind of getting out there, learning about the research, learning that, the condition, you do relapse, and that, you might have to, come up with solutions to help you when you get down at points in your life, because that's something for me that has been helpful as well, because I know that I'm not going to feel great all the time, and I'm going to relapse occasionally, and my symptoms are going to come back. But I think it's really important to be able to deal with that when it happens. Because in those moments, if you don't have a certain mindset, a mindset of, I'm going to be okay, my symptoms are going to get back, if I just kind of, have some faith, stick to a diet, continually working with my doctor, and keeping kind of a positive attitude, even though it's really hard sometimes. I think it can be but yeah, I really think that's important. I think I would,
So to boil that down, what you're saying
yeah,
is, it would have been useful for you to have understood that this is not one and done, it's a journey, right?
yeah, it's
And
a journey,
to be
definitely.
prepared for that journey,
Yeah,
because it's not like you have an infection and you take an antibiotic and then the infection is gone.
yeah,
It's something that is longer term
yeah,
and actually is very demanding on each and every one of us in terms of our perception of the experience and how it impacts our lives. And so it sounds like what you're saying is it would have been very useful for you to have understood that it's a process, it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's not a simple experience at
Yeah.
all. But
And
that
let
doesn't
me add,
necessarily mean it's a bad thing.
yeah, let me add one more point to that. I mean, you summed it up pretty perfectly there. Basically, I think we need to understand that our bodies are complex and that healing takes time. It's a combination of things. It's a synergy of pharmaceuticals, your lifestyle, natural treatments. It's understanding, self-awareness of what you deal with and being comfortable with that and being open and being able to discuss it with people. I think those are all things that are, crucial in the healing journey. And when you just take a round of antibiotics and you think that that's going to cure everything, I think that's oftentimes can be really hard to cope with that, disappointment sometimes. So definitely, to understand that healing takes time. Healing is not something that happens overnight. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's really going into it with the understanding that this is a journey, and that's really difficult because I think a lot of people have an assumption that you go to the health experts and they're going to fix you. I mean, you just kind of assume that that's the way that it works. And at least for now, that's really, really unrealistic for the majority of SIBO patients. And unfortunately, that's really difficult to reconcile, especially in the beginning phases, because I just don't think that we're wired that way as humans to, be prepared for chronic illnesses. I mean,
Yeah.
chronic illnesses are fairly new to human beings as
Yeah.
far as I'm aware. And or at least in terms of how we approach them from a health perspective.
Yeah.
So why don't we switch gears a little bit more and dig into what have been some of the, let's say, top 3 things that have helped you?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, the antibiotics at first helped me a ton. Elemental diet, I mainly use now when I relapse the elemental diet as my main tool to kind of get back on track. Just because I found even better success with that. So I'd say elemental diet, antibiotics, those are obviously two of the best treatment options for when your symptoms are, at the worst, the overgrowth is at the worst. I'd say also, sticking to a SIBO diet, whether that's, there's a bunch of different types of diets people can stick to, but I'd say simplifying diet for me too, because, when I first started on a SIBO diet, I was like a strict SCD with, maybe a little bit of starch, but I've learned over time that going too severe on one type of diet can also be detrimental. So for me, I actually needed, to incorporate a little bit of rice, a little bit of starch, potato, and to give my body enough calories. Because at the beginning, when I was doing a strict SCD diet, it was actually probably actually had a negative effect because my body was so stressed in such a weak mode that I needed some form of calories, some extra source. So I would say sticking to a lower carbohydrate diet, but not going too severe. That's what's helped me. Um, and then also, I think another thing that's helped me is, coming to the understanding that, I'm gonna have days where I don't feel good. I'm gonna, I live with a tricky case, so there's going to be times where my symptoms flare up and I'm going to need to relax and, not work as hard as I usually want to. Being able to have that awareness. So I'd say those, and then just kind of, you know, changing your lifestyle for me was a big one. I drink herbal medicinal teas, which help a lot. I can get into more of that later. There's some like digestive enzymes. So there's some different supplements that I've found helpful for me. I think it's also important for anyone else who's maybe watching or will see this, that knowing that, you'll have to find your own set of supplements that helps your body. It's different for every person. So I think, finding things that help you, you know, sticking to a lower carbohydrate diet, but not going, too drastically, you know, I guess not just eating chicken and like one vegetable if you don't have to, right? Like I know there are some cases where it's so severe and you really can't eat that much, but that's when you need to look for a doctor and do treatment options. So I'd say the treatment options, the diet, lifestyle, and just, understanding more about the illness so that you can take a positive approach to it and know that you're gonna have times where you don't feel good.
For sure. I think that's super good to keep in mind, and I can definitely relate to it as well. So maybe we'll just do a few more questions. This is like we said, we're kind of just testing this out. We wanted to see what this process looked like, and if we could kind of start generating a conversation. So if you're watching this later, please, jump into the comments, ask us any questions, give us some feedback on this format. We're not super organized this first time because we really wanted to keep this open and let it grow organically. But please jump in within the comments below so that we can kind of direct this in the future. Because we would actually like to continue this format of conversation with you guys, because we think it's really important, and we think it's something that's actually missing, is this more human contact between those of us in the SIBO community. So with that said, I would like to switch gears again.
Yeah.
There's just so much that we could talk about that I think, for this first video, just kind of going popcorn style, jumping around is kind of how we're going. But I would really like to know, and this is a big question, do you consider yourself cured? And, walk me through how you view your illness now and how that compares to how you felt about it in the past.
Yeah, this is honestly one of my favorite questions, because it's one of the toughest questions, but also, yeah, I'll get into it. But I just wanted to reiterate also to what you said before that, we're excited to do this, to experiment with this live chat. And, the main purpose is if anyone is out there who wants to chime in to ask questions, like, that's what we're, excited to see. That's what we're excited to get into, is to answer anyone out there if they have questions, and to dive in, to make this human and to get other people involved. So yeah, I'm excited about that as well. But yeah, to that question, do I think of myself as cured?
The $1 million question.
Yeah, definitely. I think you have to define what is your definition of cured. I think that's what you should ask yourself, because I think we have this.
I think for a lot of people, just to jump in, I think for a lot of people, cured is they no longer have the label SIBO as a condition. They are no longer a SIBO patient, and they can go exactly back to their life the way it was. That's just one definition of cured, I think, that some people might have in their mind, especially as they're first getting into the whole SIBO world. I just want to throw that out there as one example.
Yeah, definitely. I think it starts with how you define cured. Like you said, it's when you're first new to this, I think everyone wants to, take something and have everything go away, vanish overnight. Me personally, after what I've been through and what I've learned, I don't see that as realistic. So my definition of cured has changed a little bit. And for me, a definition of cured when you're someone who lives or who comes down with an illness like this is, being comfortable with yourself, being able to enjoy your life, being able to live and to be out and to hang out with friends occasionally, getting away from the isolation, and really just being happy again, being able to enjoy your quality of life. So to me, that's how I see cured, because a lot of times the definition that mainstream will tell you of cured, that you take a pill and everything's fixed. I think that's a false interpretation of what a cure is. So, I would say I consider myself, I don't know, I relapse and I still struggle at times and my symptoms flare up. So I don't know. It's a hard question. I would say, um, like for the definition of cured, where I have no symptoms and, everything is like it was before, no, I'm not cured. But I am to the point now where I have a better understanding of what I deal with, the illness, and I work with some good doctors. I've been able to experiment a lot with things that work for me. So I have a better mindset now, and I'm in a better place than I was before. So I would say, that is in some respects being cured. In some respects, I'm definitely not perfect. I still relapse, but I would say in some sense, sure, I could consider myself cured, but not in the sense that all my symptoms are gone and they stay away. So it's hard. I don't know. It's a hard question.
Right. So would you say that your expectations of, like, how would you compare what you thought would happen at this point with where you're at now? And do you think that if you told yourself when you first started how you feel about it now, that person would be okay with everything that transpired between then and now? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, kind of. So like, um, yeah, I
Because
think
I
as
think
you,
that I think a lot of us assume when we first start that we're going to reach a point where we are, we can take off the SIBO gloves and just move on, right?
yeah, yeah,
And I think exactly like what you're saying is important. It's you actually have to reframe your expectations of what the future holds. Um, and I guess, do you think that um, I don't know. I'll just give you the floor. I'm still trying to formulate
yeah,
my question, but I'll just throw it back to you.
yeah. It's a tough topic. I don't know. Like I said, I think my definition of cured now has changed, and I would say, I'm still on my journey. I'm not perfect yet. I still struggle. But you know, I think I really believe that people can get to the point where they consider themselves cured and they don't have to think about the issue as much anymore, right? I think, when you get to the point where you're able to manage your symptoms, and you've learned enough about your body and what works for it and what sets it off and how to treat it when it relapses, and you know everything that goes into it, a lifestyle change of living a healthier life, which a chronic illness forces you to make. um, I think that I think everyone can be cured in that sense, um, to where, you know they have a positive mindset, they're happy with their life, and they're enjoying themselves. And the main thing is they've gotten away from, um, continually having to, search for information, and they've learned how to deal with their bodies. So I don't know if that gets to the point you're talking about, but that's just kind of what came to mind. I think everyone can get to that point of being cured in a sense. Um,
Right. I think everyone can get to cured as long as you reframe your idea of what that means. So, in my case, I do think of myself as cured, but I also put that in the box of remission, right? And
yeah,
so, I would probably have, some level of overgrowth and thus symptoms here and there for a long time. But I've reached a point where I have a routine in life where I almost feel like I don't have SIBO at all anymore.
yeah,
Of course, it's always in the back of my mind, but and I do, of course, like you're saying, have flares here and there. But I've reached a point where I feel very comfortable with having this chronic illness, and I call that a victory. I mean, honestly,
yeah,
I really feel like I've planted my flag, and I feel good about it. And of course, there could be more work to be done. Maybe I could be even better than where I'm at now. But it's been such a journey just to get to this point where we're
Yeah.
at,
Yeah.
that if you can get to a point where you can return to many aspects of your life as it was, of course, you have to go through a period of grief, and then you have to kind of reformulate how you approach life to some degree. But once you do that, and then you can kind of get back to some of the things that were important to you, and you can balance SIBO at the same time, then I think that that's a victory. I mean, I really do. And
Yeah.
the word cure is kind of like this. It's kind of like the word fluent in a
Yeah.
language. Like if you start learning a language and you're not a native, you'll never be fluent. There will always be conversation vocabulary that you will never fully grasp.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality, because there's tens of thousands of words and it's very complicated, right? But you can get to a point where you can have a conversation with anybody.
Yeah.
You might not know every single word, you might not know every single grammatical structure, but you feel very confident and you can get as close to a native as you can. And so I think that's a very apt metaphor, because we can get very close to a life that we feel very good about, and that's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's, let me just say something to that. I think that's what the hope of doing discussions like this, that's what, helping new research, that's what, learning what other people are going through. I think that all helps people get to that point where they're more comfortable with their life and, their health. So that's why I think this is important to, you know, encourage discussion like this. So that we can help people understand and you relate to other people and get on a better, either physically or mentally in a better place with their health. Yeah.
right, right, and I think it would have been really, really useful for us if there were other people who were really actively sharing their experiences and their understanding of this process when we first started going, so that it would have been less of an emotional roller coaster. I mean, if you kind of understand what you're getting yourself in for, then you're going to have a better chance of being successful, or you might shorten the time frame of how long it would take for you to feel comfortable with your new SIBO life, or your post SIBO life. And I put that in parentheses because
Yeah.
there may never be a post SIBO life, but I would say post treatment phase, post like intense SIBO is everything, right? And so I agree. I'm entirely there with you. So how should we? How do you think we should continue the conversation at this point?
Yeah. How do you think we should continue? Is that you're asking?
Yeah, where should we take this next?
I guess, to that point, I'm just kind of curious because one of the things that I think is so challenging with this, living with this condition, especially at first, when you don't know as much about it, is like we were talking about the isolation, right? Where, you come down with these symptoms, they're pretty severe, and it just kind of shakes your life around. And, it kind of isolates you from friends sometimes because you don't want to relate, you don't want to do the activities that some friends are doing anymore because it hurts or it gives you symptoms that makes your life chaotic. So I guess I just want to ask you a question as well, kind of make this a good discussion back and forth. Um, I think everyone has this point when they're struggling with this issue, these digestive symptoms, where they feel like they're isolated. So just tell me, like, did you go through that? Like, what was kind of your rock bottom? And, because obviously we're talking about getting out of that and getting to a point where you can get back and, get back to healthy relationships, a better attitude, a better mindset about it, treatment options that help, all these different things. So just give me a little insight into, your isolation, what you experienced and, your struggles as well at that point.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really wish that that was something that people would discuss more freely, because it's so it's such a profound part of the SIBO experience, especially at this stage of the game where this illness, the awareness level is not nearly where it needs to be. And so a lot of people struggle for many years. I've heard stories of decades, right? And that's just wrong. So I can offer a little bit of insight into what that process looked like for me. And that's a pretty big question. But, when I think isolation related to this illness, I think back to after I graduated from college and I moved to Spain so that I could teach English. And I was there for almost 2 years. And my capacity to be invested in my experience in Spain, I don't want to use the word deteriorated, but over time became more and more challenging. And I would say in the months up to when I left prematurely, because I really wanted to come back to the States and get the support that I needed, find the resources that I need, work with the right practitioners. Because at that time, and we're talking only a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, there was nothing. There were absolutely zero resources for SIBO patients in Spain. And it's actually a funny story because now there is a gal, I forget her name, but I talked to her a little bit, who is teaching English in Spain now, like I was, and she's created a Facebook support group for SIBO patients over there. She's got a blog. And so it's amazing to me to see that now awareness is arriving in Spain. And so this is going to be, this really is a global phenomenon, and I'm really excited to see how it grows so that less people experience that period of isolation and frustration that you and I and so many others did. But I just wanted to throw that out there before I jump in. But basically, what that looked like for me is, it was, I really had to boil down my life to the top priorities. So that would be like work and sleep and eating,
Definitely.
And you really have to cut out some of the other things that are really important to you in order to do the things that you are obligated to do, right?
Yeah.
So
To live,
you
yeah.
have to go to work, and in order to work, you have to be healthy and present. So you have to get enough sleep. You have to make sure that you are not overexerting yourself or causing too much inflammation, so you have to really focus on the wellness pieces like diet. But for me, it was like, it got to a point where I had to focus so much.
Technical difficulties?
Sorry, I was
You
just
there?
saying.
You good? All right.
Yeah, I'm there. I had an Amber Alert just came up on my phone.
Oh, wow.
I know, the technology these days. Anyway, so I guess what I was saying is I had to focus so much on just being present on work that I had to cut out all the things that were really beautiful about being abroad, traveling, going out with friends, trying new things. And that was really, 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 really hard for me because for anybody who's lived abroad, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Of course, there are moments where it's kind of glamorous, where it looks as good as the blogs and Instagram pictures. But in reality, you're starting a life where you have a very small network or no network, and to get to a point where you are happy with your social life and your work life and where you live, I mean, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And so after 2 years, I was kind of just on the cusp of feeling really good about my life abroad, and then SIBO just kind of punched that in the face. And so as I had to remove myself from going out with other people, traveling, just being, social and experiencing Spanish culture, I was just spending a lot of time in my apartment, in my bed, and that was really crushing because it wasn't just my health that I was losing. It was my entire life, basically, and so that was really difficult. And there were many, many, many months where I thought that I was the only one. It wasn't until about a month or two before I left Spain that I discovered the SIBO discussion group and encountered other patients. And so it was a long time of being isolated by myself in another country, and that's that was really upsetting for me at the time, but I didn't really have a choice. So, I mean, I think this question manifests for other people in a lot of ways, but for me, it was like I didn't have a network of, longtime friends and family. It was like new friends that I had cultivated. And so, it's not like you're living in your hometown and you can fall back on people that and that really care about you. Of course, I did have some very special relationships over there, but my point is, it was very, very palpable that I was dealing with an illness that was forcing me to disengage from my life, and so that's why I had to kind of press the pause button and come back to the States and focus on my health. So I think for other people, they go even longer than I did in terms of feeling isolated and alone and not getting the right support. But for me, it was almost like it grabbed me and just shook me because
Yeah.
it was so in my face that I had to do something about it. And even though I had managed to deal with it and be isolated for such a long time, it was also kind of a blessing in that I reached a point where I had no choice but to confront it and work on it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I love sharing these stories and having these discussions is because the emotional impact that this has on people is undescribable. It's profound and it changes their life, and it's very a lot of times people suffer in silence. So um, and I think that's why we connected well as well, because I had a similar situation where I was also dealing with this issue when I moved to Alabama to finish college. And so I was in a new territory as well, and I didn't have, I had made some friends out there, but I didn't have a ton of friends. My family wasn't there, and just dealing with symptoms and the suffering, and at times being isolated in my dorm room or my apartment that I lived in out there. It's very challenging, and that's why I think it's important to try and connect with other people who are dealing with similar issues, or just be someone to help encourage them and say, um, I've kind of been there before, and it's not easy. Like, um, you know, just dealing with this condition, I understand it. It's not easy. I've suffered as well, but there is hope. Like, you can get to a point where your health improves. You manage it with treatment options and diet, and understand more about what's going on, and there is hope to get better. So I think it's important to encourage people. Um, but yeah, other than that, one other question I wanted to ask is, I think it's important too when someone's at that situation in their life where, let's say, they're isolated and they've kind of really started to have a severe case of SIBO IBS, and they're kind of isolated from their friends. They don't want to do things as much. Like, what I know it's hard at that point in time. I struggled with it as well, because sometimes you just want to lay down, right? You just want to kind of be alone. Um, but I mean, what were some things for you that, either kept you going, or what did you do to just kind of keep moving, right? Just kind of say, there has to be a way to get better. Like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to give it the best I can, right? So like, how did you keep moving during that period of suffering? Because I think that's really hard sometimes when you're at that point in your life. Um,
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question, and
yeah,
it's something that I hadn't thought about in a long time.
yeah,
But one of the reasons why, or one of the ways in which I was able to continue going through the motions was a conversation that I had with my dad. And my dad is a high school counselor, and so he works with kids from all walks of life, including those who have chronic illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia. And so he had exposure to other people with chronic illnesses. And basically, what he told me was, um, you know, you're gonna, you really have no choice but to work twice as hard to be half as good. And that's just where you're at right now. And if you don't do that, then you're going to kind of fall apart. And so you have to. I mean, for me, it was like I was so frustrated that I kind of just wanted to give up. I mean, I was like, why is it? What's the point of just suffering so much, and why keep going through the motions if it's such an enormous effort. And basically he told me it was because it was my obligation to myself and to people who cared about me, to continue being the best that I could be, even if it meant that I had to work really, really, really hard at it. I mean, and the frustrating part about that is that people don't see that you're working so hard at it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so, if you go to work and you're just super fatigued, like I was,
yeah,
and but I still had to go to work, and so I had to put in substantially more effort into doing something basic and normal. And I don't want the takeaway of this to be that SIBO patients just have to suck it up. But my point is, I realized that I just had to work really hard to get less, more input for less output, and be okay with that, and as best I could. Otherwise, you start getting into a cycle of, okay, why is this even worth it? What's
yeah,
and so this is actually a really good question, and I actually hope to kind of formulate it a little bit more,
yeah,
so I can communicate it in a little bit more cohesive way. But essentially, it was like I felt like it was kind of a duty to myself and to the people that cared about me, my family, to continue being the best that I could be, even though I wasn't up to my own standards for how I was living my life. And that was a huge, huge challenge, reconciling that the gap between who you are and who you want to be is really big, and you're really uncomfortable with that distance.
yeah,
But in order to keep living, and in order to keep going, and in order to have the chance of getting better, you have to undergo that really tough time. And you have to be a fighter. You have to fight. And so I don't think I answered this question very well, but I think I'm just starting to answer this question for myself
yeah,
just now.
yeah. It's good. Yeah,
But actually, I'd be kind of interested to hear your answer to this question as well,
yeah,
because that's, what does keep you going, and
yeah.
during those.
Definitely. I'm super excited to answer this question just because I think it's the one of the hardest issues to deal with when you're at that point in your life where, let's say you come down with SIBO and um, it gets pretty severe and you stop hanging out with friends because your symptoms are so nasty. Let's say diarrhea, gas, bloating. You can't eat out as much with them. You have to cut out drinking. This is what happened for me, basically. Um, and it is really hard at that time to, stay motivated, but I don't know, for me, I just kind of always have this belief that, we can get better, I can get better, and that it just takes time. I kind of always believe that I will get better, and that suffering it's not going to stay that way. And I think also for me, what was really important was, um, to take small steps, right? To say to myself before I went out for the day, let's say my stomach was acting up in the morning and, I had to sit on the toilet for a while or whatever. And then let's say I had to go to class. Just telling myself that, just do the best you can with how you feel. And, everything else after that, don't worry about what people think about you. Because I think one of the hardest issues too is, people don't understand what you're dealing with. But and also society throws, we have this vision of society where, if you're not living up to an expectation of someone else, then you're no good. But that's really something that people need to get away from, because in my views, if you're doing the best you can each day with how you feel, and taking on that challenge, taking small steps, if you're suffering, if you're having, if you're fatigued, if you're having symptoms, just doing the best you can with each day, and telling yourself before you go out that, I don't feel too great, but I'm going to give it a go, right? I'm just going to give it a shot, see what happens, try and do the best I can. And if I do that, then, that's a successful day to me. I think that's how I kind of dealt with it when I was at that point where I was really struggling. And then also just the belief of, I think everyone can get better, or, to the point where they're cured, in a sense, where they're happier with their life, where their symptoms are reduced, and they're able to get out and do things more. I always believe that, we are capable, whether entrepreneurs or scientists or, people who really care about something, that we can get to the point where we provide solutions where people can live a better life. I just believe that. So, if I was suffering, this is also one of the things that I thought about a lot when I was suffering. I just thought that, if I was suffering, and if the doctors that I was seeing couldn't help me out, that there had to be some way for me to learn, some way for me to experiment with my own body, to where I would be able to live a better life. So I always believed that. I always tried to take it one step at a time, not to put too much pressure on myself, and to just kind of always keep that faith. I think that's kind of what kept me going and keeps me going, right? When I have relapses, or when I don't feel good, even to this day. I'm
Yeah,
just hopeful. I guess I'm just hopeful for the future. You know, and that's kind of why I like doing these discussions, because I've been through a lot, and you know, it's cool to be at a point where you're at least a little more comfortable and you can help other people and maybe share what you've learned. So that's kind of what keeps me going, is that, I don't know, the belief that life can be great. I think it can. So,
I mean, honestly, I couldn't have said it better myself. So I kind of think that maybe we should end on that note. But
yeah,
just to kind of summarize what you said, basically, what I got out of it is small victories and faith.
yeah,
And I think that those are really important tools. And of course, when you boil it down, it sounds so simple, but it's really challenging. So maybe, in a future discussion, we can really dial into what does that faith look like? What happens when that faith is challenged? And
yeah,
what are some small victories that help you, kind of keep going? And
yeah.
I think that could really be a whole discussion unto itself. But until then, do you think that this was a good stopping point?
Yeah, I think that's, we've had an awesome discussion. I hope some people can see this, to get some value out of this, to see what other people are going through. I know we didn't have a ton of people chime in today, but, it's an experiment, it's a test run. And I think that, as we continue to do this every once in a while, I think people will find it cool, valuable, and, just be able to connect with other people and ask questions about what we've been through, what's worked for us. The mental aspects of dealing with
I
this.
hope so.
Yeah,
And I just want to reiterate that if you've actually made it this far, that's phenomenal. In watching this video, we really appreciate it. But please comment or like, but engage with us. Give us some feedback about how this video went, and how you think that the conversation could continue in the future, because we would really like to have future discussions. And as we've been saying, we really want to create a more human feel to this community, because it absolutely is a community. It's not just a group of individual patients out on their own. We really are a collective, and the more that we communicate and work together, the more that we are going to not only support our own health, but also advance awareness of this illness and our own collective goals. So with that, just be sure to comment and communicate with us. And I think we're going to sign off, unless you have any final words, Josh.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say one final thing is, anyone who's watching this, I appreciate you watching it, and just like to kind of reiterate too, our goal. We've been through this. We've suffered. We still kind of deal with the condition, and we've managed to deal with it better now. But the main goal of these discussions and our motivation behind these things is, to get to a point where there's better solutions, right? So that people, can speed up their healing journey and, feel better and come to that peace of mind that we want everyone to get to. So, I just hope that, we can continue this in the future, and this is just kind of a start of something bigger. I think we can really, make an impact here. So I'm excited, and thanks so much for anyone watching, and we'll be sure and let people know if we're doing this again. And yeah, thanks so much.
Cool. Absolutely. All right. Thanks, guys.